Hey kids, it's Chris from CS Tech. In this video series, we're going to be looking at Google Charts. Now, you have a lot of data visualization tools to choose from. There's Tableau, there's 3D.js, there's Google Charts, and Charts.js. There are a variety of tools out there. So we're going to be looking at Google Charts. And I tend to think it's one of the better libraries out there. It has some shortcomings, but none of them are perfect. But we'll dive into that. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the environment first. We're going to get your environment set up. We're going to be using React. We're going to be using a modern framework. We'll be coding in JavaScript. And by the end of this course, what you'll be able to do is create a dashboard style user interface with multiple visualizations on the same page. So let's get started. Okay, in part one of this series, we are going to look at going from hello world to hello table. So we'll start off with just getting the environment up and running and getting Google Charts loaded, and then we'll work through to actually creating a chart wrapper and rendering our first table chart. The purpose of this tutorial is not to go into Webpack and Babel and the environment. I'll just touch on a few of these things so that you know how these are working. We're going to focus more on the front end code than the development environment, but there are a few things that are worth mentioning. So the way this was constructed was with Create React App. And I'm going to assume that you can wire up Webpack. You can at least install some modules through Node. You can start to create routes with Express. And that if you have the code that you see here on the screen, which I'll provide on GitHub, that you'll be off and running. You'll be good to go. So just kind of stepping through what's going on here. We have a server, which is going to, we have an Express server, and Express is basically going to serve everything from our public path. So we have our index.html, and we're going to have eventually our dist bundle.js, and that's going to be the heavy lifting of our application. We're going to be loading Google Charts in the head through the CDN link, gstatic.com. So we're going to be serving everything from the public path. We're going to be rendering our application using HTML, and we're going to be compiling from the source folder into the dist folder, so compiling to bundle.js. So if we look at webpack.config.js, the first thing that we see is that our entry point here for all our scripts is a file that doesn't exist. It's under source/app.js. So that's where we're going to need to create our application, at least the entry point for it. We can import modules from other files, and we're going to be compiling from Sass to CSS, and we are going to be serving everything from the public folder. So first thing we're going to do is create our app.js. this will all get compiled to the bundle.js. And since we're creating a React application, we will import React from React. And we will need to render something. So we'll do import React DOM from React DOM. And then we're going to, for now, we're going to start with our functional component. So let's do const JSX equals props. We don't have any props currently, but we may at some point in the future. And we're just going to return something for now. Return div, and we'll call this, we'll say, my Google Charts application. Okay, so with that, let's render to the screen just to see how this works. React DOM.render, and we'll say JSX, and we're going to be using app as our, instead of root, as our root for this React application. So document.get element by ID app. All right, so we can see how that works after we set up a method for viewing it. So let's test it out. The scripts that we have available to us and this package.json file should be available in the GitHub repo as well. If you just go to github.com/chrisbuck, you'll see the gcharts repo. And we have a number of scripts that are available. What we're going to be using is dev server along with Webpack. So the good news is you don't have to set Webpack up. It's all set up for you. Just copy the script and place it in a webpack.config.js file, and along with Babel RC, and you should be good to go. So all we have to do here is run yarn run dev server. And Webpack will do the work for us. Okay, so we're going to localhost 8080. Here we have the Google Charts documentation. So let's say localhost 8080, my Google Charts application. Great. So we see that that's working. So we need to do things in a particular sequence. And if we don't do them in that particular sequence, then when we go to draw an element, the code that allows us to interact with the Google Charts API will not yet be loaded. So we're going to do something like this. We're going to have a function, and it's going to be preload. Oh, and we don't want to auto complete that. Okay, preload. And it's going to take in a function with some parameters, and then we'll construct an arrow function, and we're setting the callback to be the rendering of the app. So preload is not yet defined. If we try and run this right now, we will just get an error. That preload is not defined. That's what we expect. Now, what we're going to need to do is create that function. What I'd like to do is actually do that in a separate folder within source. So we're going to split this up. We're going to have our components. We can go ahead and create that folder now. And then we're going to have another folder called data. You might be wondering where we're going to get the data from to display. So where do we get the data to display? I just so happen to have a bunch of data already, dummy data created with a JSON generator. So we'll just create that file while we're here, data.js, and it's going to be a variable called sample data. And we're going to have about 100, or maybe less. I'm not sure exactly how many numbers, how many objects we have here, what the count is, but we have a few. We have enough to have several slices in a pie chart. So we'll save our work there. So we have our data.js, and within the data folder, we're going to create preload.js. All right. So within preload, we are going to first import React from React. And then we're going to import our sample data from data. All right. And the next thing we need to do is we're going to create an asynchronous function, which is going to allow us to wait for the loading of the scripts that we need in the right sequence. And then when they are loaded, execute our callback. And that's going to be what we export. So in other words, we're going to create the preload function. So const preload equals async callback. There's our callback function. So this is the callback function that we define in our app.js file, our entry file. Entry script, rather. Okay, so then we're going to let Google equal await. So we have to wait for it, but we don't have the function yet constructed. So let's name it load Google. And let's set up export default preload. So we're not ready to have this work quite yet, but we're getting there. So what do we do when we load Google? Well, let's create the function, load Google. It's not going to take in any parameters. It doesn't need to be asynchronous. And what we're going to do is we're going to get Google from the window. So we have Google, we have the script loaded, but, or we have the script defined here in the gstatic script that we got from the Google Charts documentation. But until this script runs, there will not be a Google object that we can log to the console or do anything else with. So what we're going to do is wait for this script to fully execute. And in the course of executing, we're going to get Google from window.google. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to load the visualization API and the core chart package. So we're going to call google.charts.load current. And then we can select all the packages that we want included in our application. Packages, and that takes in an array. So we want controls to be able to have drop downs and other inputs to change the makeup of our charts. We want core chart, and we want table. And then we're going to return Google, because we need to set our Google variable within the scope of preload as well. So by the time this script fully executes, we should have a Google object that we can log to the console. So let's just do that, console.log Google, just to make sure that everything's working correctly. And we have to execute our callback, so let's make sure that we execute our callback. Okay. Preload is all set, and we need to import preload from data preload. Okay. We exported it here, so we can import it here. And this is our callback function. So if everything's working, we should see that we do have a render, and we've logged to the console an object, which is the Google object. And we see that there's charts, and it has a variety of methods, load, and we also see the Google visualization object, which has a bunch of other functions and methods within it. So we're going to be focusing mostly on the chart wrapper to start, but eventually we'll be able to construct bar charts because we have access to this object, the Google.visualization object. We also have access to the Google.charts object. So this is all working well. But we need to define the preload function that we are exporting here just a little bit more. So after we load Google, which we're doing here, and we can get rid of this log, what we need to do is we need to set an onload callback. Google is expecting us to have a callback, which is all of the code that executes after Google has been loaded. So what we need to have ideally is the data table that is going to be the basis of the table chart element. And this will make a lot more sense in a minute. We need to have that already constructed. And once we create a data table once, we really don't need to construct it again, because there are things that are called views. So if we don't want a column in our table, we want to hide a column, we can create a view to hide the column. The data table doesn't need to change. The data table should be immutable. It should be something that that does not change. We just change the views associated with that data table, but the data table itself does not change. So we're going to put in Google.charts. That's one of the various objects that we have access to, Google.charts, and then set onload callback. And so this is one of the good things about logging the Google.charts or the Google.visualization methods to the console. You are able to dig in, go in a level and see what methods are available to you. And you may or may not discover all of those methods. There are methods that are not documented in Google's own documentation that allow you to do things that you wouldn't know you could do if you hadn't decided to, go rummaging around through the methods that are available in the console. So this is a good thing to know, especially for the Google Charts API, because, like I just said, there are situations where you'll be able to do something that you otherwise wouldn't know you could do. Okay, so we're going to call Google.charts.setOnload callback. And we're going to have this be an asynchronous function as well. And we're going to say let data table equal await create data table. We don't yet have that function defined, but we will shortly. And then instead of having the callback down here, we're going to have our callback within our callback. So we created an anonymous asynchronous function as our callback. This will execute, and then we'll execute our callback specified up there. And anything we want to pass on to our application, anything that we want to be available to our JSX in the form of a prop1 equals prop1, anything we want to pass along to our JSX, we can pass along over here in our preload function. So let's pass Google and data table, because those are the two objects that we're going to be working with on a regular basis. If we have a data table, we can create views, we can create whatever we want. We also need access to Google because Google has all the methods that we're interested in, charts and visualization. So with Google and with a data table, we can do whatever we need to. All right, and then we need to create this function. So we'll go up here and we'll say const create data table equals async. All right, and then we're going to make sure that we have access to Google. So we'll say if Google equals undefined, then Google equals await window.google. Just an extra check to make sure that we do indeed have the Google object that we specified in this script, or that is specified in the script up here. Then we're going to say let data table and I'm intentionally spelling that differently just to have it be just for clarity. You'll see why in just a second. Equal new Google.visualization. There's the other method family of methods that we have access to through Google, visualization dot data table. And so we could log this to the console if we want. We just need to make sure that we return it, return data table. And then we will have a valid object here. So we could even log it down here. We could say console.log data table. This is going to be empty. It's not going to have any rows or columns as you would expect because we haven't wired it up to our dummy data here, but we will in a second just to make sure it works. Let's log it to the console. Okay, and here we go. We have, we're no longer logging Google, we're logging a data table with a lot of empty arrays and nulls, and that's to be expected. Okay, so that's working as we expect. So now we get into the keystroke there. Now we get into the business of adding the table columns and the data table rows. So let's say data table, should do it here where it's defined. Data table equals await, and we're going to create a new function here to add the columns. Add data table calls to data table. We're going to do it in this order. We're going to add the columns first, add calls first, and then, as you would expect, we will add rows next. We're going to do it in this order because there's a method that allows us to add an array of values for each row, but it has to match up with the number of columns that we've already specified. So first we specify the columns, then we specify the rows. So let's create both functions for now. Data table equals await, add data table rows to data table. I'm going to be modifying that. Great. Now we have to add those functions. So we'll create another function here, const add data table calls, add data table calls equals data table as our parameter. And then we're going to say let table calls equal an array. So what do we want our columns to be? Well, we can go to data.js and we can pick them out. Let's say we want the ID, but we don't want it with underscore, so we can say, okay, let's have one of them be ID. So what we're going to do is we need a particular particular keys for this object. What we're saying is that the first column is this object, and we're going to specify an ID. We're going to use ID. So that's what we're looking up. The label is ours to define. So we can say we want that to be ID, all caps, and the type is string. Okay, column 1. And now column 2, we can pick out more information. So let's say age is a good one. Let's have the ID be age. The label is going to be capital A, lowercase ge, uppercase age. The type is going to be number. Yeah, that's a number. So if we don't want to have any data conversion problems, we need to match up the type. Okay, then let's have eye color be the next one. That was in there. Yeah, eye color right below. And maybe we'll have the name and company. So let's do those two. So let's do name up here. All right, so the ID is name, label is name, and the type is string. So I think you kind of see how this is going. And company. All right, ID, company, label, company, and that type is string. Great, so we've added our table columns. I'm not going to save it yet. Now we need to create the add data table rows. Actually, we're not done with columns yet. So we have this array. So then we say we're going to create our columns with this sort of method: data table dot add column, and then we're going to plug in one of these for each column that we're creating. We're going to take that object and add it to this type of function. So what we really need to do is do that within a loop. So let's do for let C in table calls data table dot add column table calls C. Okay, so that's going to add each of these columns using the method that is specified in the Google Charts. So data table methods add column. So we have type, option, label, option ID. Since we're specifying the keys here, it doesn't need to be in that sequence. So you'll notice that we have ID, label, and type instead of type, label, ID. So long as we have the keys here to identify which is which, the code will work just as we expect. We're going to return data table. Okay, so now we have created the add table columns. So we're going to modify, at this step, we're going to modify the data table to add the data table columns. And at this step, we're going to add in the rows. So that is the next function to create. Const add data table rows equals data table is our only parameter. And then we are going to let our output equal an array. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do a loop through our sample data. So we're getting all the values from our sample data file. And this is an array. So we can loop through this, look up the values that we want by their keys, and then add those values to an array, and then use a data table dot add rows method to add this array. And then we should return our data table. So that's the plan. So just so this is clear, we're going to loop through sample data. And within the loop, we're going to create our, we're going to push values to our output. And then we are going to add output to the rows within data table. And then we're going to return data table. Okay, so for, let's let R equal 0. R needs to be less than sample data dot length. And R will increment. We'll let a row equal sample data R. This should look pretty familiar. We're just doing a loop to retrieve those values, and then we'll let our keys equal ID age and eye color. We'll let row data an array. And so we could certainly abstract this more. We could certainly have ways of letting our user specify which of the values we want it is that we want to extract from the sample data. So we could have ways that the user could specify that they want the balance to be column 1, gender to be column 2, email to be column 3, etc. But for now, we're going to hard code some of these things, and I don't think we had eye color. We did not. We could probably just add it in. So let's do ID, eye color, label, eye color, type is string. Yeah, leave a comma there. Okay. So we could do that, but for now, just to demonstrate the essential functionality, we're just going to work with what we've already specified here, and we're going to be explicit. So we have ID, name, age, eye color, and company. Okay. All right, and then for each of these values, so we'll say for let k equals 0, k is less than keys dot length. So for each of the keys, k plus plus, we'll let a key equal key k. Get that particular key, and then we're going to get the value from our sample data. So we'll let our data value equal our row key. So we're going to look it up. We're saying for each of these objects, and then for each key, so ID and then age, we want to look up that value by key. We want to look up 27 by the key of age. We want to look up green by the key of eye color, etc. And then we're going to push that to row data. Row data.push data value. And then we have our row data, and we're going to push that to output. So we're going to have an array of arrays. Each subarray is a row of data. So collectively, they are all the rows of data that we need. And so we're going to add our output of rows to our, say, output of rows to data table. Not sure if it's grammatically correct to say of or to, but we'll figure it out. Data table.add rows output. So that's going to look like an array of an array of arrays, plural. That's what it's going to look like. And actually, just delete that. So we add them all to our data table, and then all we have left to do is return data table. So now we can save that. And we can save this. And we should be able to see these columns and rows that we've created in the log. So we see that here that we have an array of 5 and an array of 38. So 5 is probably the columns and 38 is probably the rows. Let's see. Yep. For 5, we have ID, name, age, eye color, and company, and with all the properties that we've specified, ID, label, and type. And then for the rows, we have this specially formatted Google format with a C object. And then, so that's the column. It's expecting 5 values. I'm sorry, the C is not a column, it's the row. It's expecting 5 column values for that row. And that's what we have here. And then we have those same 5 types of values for each row. So we are getting close to being able to display an actual chart here. This is progress. This is good because now we have an actual data table. So in the next video, what I'm going to show you how to do is create the chart wrapper and then draw the table chart. So I'll see you in the next video.